South Africa's AGOA deal may well be in jeopardy after U.S. congressmen called for a review of that bilateral relationship. The move was triggered by South Africa's recent court application at the International Court of Justice over the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Some might remember that in 2023, the U.S. ambassador to South Africa accused Pretoria of sending weapons and ammunition to Russia amid its war against Ukraine. The South African inquiry into those allegations later found that there was no evidence of illegal selling of weapons to Moscow. So how are all of these things feeding into these moves by U.S. congressmen? Joining us for this discussion is Laird Treiber. He is a senior associate at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Laird, it's great to talk to you from Washington this morning. I mean, is it too simple to say that these moves were triggered by what South Africa has done at the ICJ?
Well, thank you very much for having me, and good afternoon. In some ways, the simple answer is yes. So it's not just the ICJ, but it's a string of actions going back over now, probably a year and a half. And perhaps just to call out, there is specifically a bill that's been introduced by two very important members of the House. Congressman James is the chair of the Africa Subcommittee in the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He and Mr. Moskowitz have introduced a bill, a very unique bill, that calls on the administration to review U.S. relations with South Africa. And it cites a number of factors, so including the contretemps with the questions about what happened with the Lady R and support for Russia, Ukraine, etc. It certainly talks about, there's a number of statements that are quoted from South African government officials about the events around October 7th last year. And then there's some serious concerns expressed about South Africa's relations with China, etc. So there's a number of specific things. Actually, the ICJ is not mentioned in this bill, but there are other congressmen, other senators, for instance, that have expressed very similar issues, and there have been concerns raised in other bills calling for the administration to review specific provisions of U.S.-South African cooperation. So it's, I think the short answer is there's a set of concerns that a number of congressmen and senators want to be reviewed.
Do you think, Laird, that external pressures, shall we call them, could be behind this call for a review, outside of all of the issues that you've just outlined?
What kind of external pressures?
External pressures from Israel?
No. This is, I think this is 100% kind of within the U.S. system. Again, I think just to point out just the two or three factors that I've raised. So, for instance, the concern about South Africa-Russia relations, dealing in terms of its response to Russia's attack on Ukraine, have nothing to do with Israel. The longstanding ties to Iran, etc., really that's a separate kind of issue. U.S. has its own longstanding sets of policies towards Iran. And then the China sets of concerns that are in Congressman James's bill have nothing to do with Israel. So I think the core thing here is not to make it too complicated. There are very important members of Congress that are very upset, very concerned by some of South Africa's actions and statements.
So AGOA is, as we speak this morning for you, at real risk?
So maybe just not to get too technical, but Congressman James's bill does not mention AGOA. And so I think that's perhaps an important feature to draw out in that it's calling for a complete review of all aspects of the bilateral relationship. There are other bills, including one introduced last fall by Senator Coons, that call for an immediate out-of-cycle review of South Africa's eligibility under AGOA. And so this has clearly been on the minds of a number of senators and congressmen. And so I think perhaps some of the same concerns. So I think it's too soon to say exactly what would happen in terms of South Africa's eligibility under AGOA. But I guess I would suggest that that there are perhaps deeper, broader issues. It's not just about AGOA.
So what do you reckon it would take to mend these relations?
Really good question. I might suggest perhaps even just something simple like maybe a visit to Washington, or inviting the President Biden to come to South Africa, maybe sitting down for some serious talks and actually talking through. I would suggest that there are so many more things, that there's such a broad menu of shared interests and long history of cooperation that I think perhaps just a review of that between the two countries would show just where deeper ties could be fostered. And I think perhaps something like that would go a long way. I think also perhaps just to, the United States certainly understands that not everyone is going to share all of our views, etc. But I think there is perhaps a sense that maybe some more balance. So, for instance, I don't know what South Africa has done as a government to support Ukraine, etc. But there's probably more that could be done along those lines, etc. And so I think, again, perhaps just some creative thinking and some restoring of balance, I think, would go a long way. Yeah,
there are a lot of geopolitical issues that South Africa and the U.S. currently, as much as they do see eye to eye on some, on others, they differ ideologically.
With great respect, I think there may be some disputes over tactics, but I guess I would suggest to you that the U.S. and South Africa probably do agree on more of the long-term outcomes, even in places like Gaza, certainly in the Middle East, certainly on global development and things like that. So, I think there are a lot more shared goals than may be appreciated, and I think sometimes it's too easy to get lost in some of the tactics, which can draw a lot of attention, and there can be a lot of issues to be a lot of concern about kind of the day-to-day. But I think it's a concern about perhaps just exactly where are those long-term shared interests, and that's, I think, what you're seeing from Congress.
When I asked you the question about what it would take to mend the relationship, you talked about a visit. And speaking of visits, I can't imagine that Iran's visit to South Africa at the end of this month would help these bilateral relations.
I completely share your assessment. In fact, it would seem to be almost perfectly calculated to inflame them.
Wow. So, Laird Treiber, shall we leave it there for this afternoon? It's been great talking to you. Thanks very much indeed for joining us your early morning in Washington. Laird is a senior associate at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Certainly a story that is far from over, and we'll certainly keep an eye on this move in the U.S. Congress. And of course, with that upcoming meeting, South Africa to host the Iranian president on the 27th of February.